In this video, I'm going to be casting some resin bases that I've made in a previous video. Okay, in order to cast these, you're going to need something to sit them on and a way to dam that up. You're also going to want to set the bases down and secure them so that they don't try to float up or move around once the silicone's in place. So I'm just going to tack these down with some hot glue. Be very careful not to burn yourself. I was very careful not to burn myself. Okay, now that we've got all those secured down, I'm going to put this barrier in place. Doesn't need to be anything fancy, just something to keep the silicone from leaking out. For now, I'm just tacking it in place. I'll come along later and put a full bead of silicone on the inside of the perimeter. Hot glue gun strings, of course. Bending that. And again, just tacking that in place. I'm bending this as opposed to cutting everything to length based on the sides and then just gluing those together. You really want as few seams here as possible. And where you do have a seam, make sure you put a continuous bead of glue. The reason I'm just tacking this in place as opposed to going with a continuous bead from the start is it just dries so much quicker, and I don't want to have to hold this for 30 minutes. Any joints you do have, again, make sure you put a continuous bead of glue, as I'm doing right here. I'm not going to be using a whole lot of silicone for this, so if it all spilled out, it wouldn't be a, financial disaster so much as it would be a craft room disaster. But yeah, you're better off just making sure you've got all your seams glued. Here I've just got a little bit of mold release spray. You don't need to spray the hell out of this. You just want to make sure everything's got a light coating. And some silicone. This is a 10-to-1 ratio by weight, not volume. Silicone finger there. And it is very important to shake your catalyzer. I did that off screen so you wouldn't laugh at me. And I'm not going to be degassing this silicone. You should, but I'm doing this just so you see what the results look like when you don't. The mold's still gonna work, it's just gonna have quite a few air bubbles in it. So I'm not gonna be using the drill to mix this. I'm just doing it by hand. You want to introduce as little air as possible while still thoroughly mixing this. The worst thing that could happen is having uncatalyzed silicone. It's a really funky mess. It's very difficult to clean off. In a lot of cases, you're just kind of better starting off with a new sculpt. Because I did not degas this, I'm doing a very thin pour to help get rid of as many air bubbles as possible in the silicone. It's not going to completely negate the fact that I've not degassed this, but it will help. So a thin stream of silicone is the way to do this. Also, you do not want to move around on the mold. You want to pour in one location. That way you don't introduce extra air. See all those air bubbles? Most of those would not be there had I degassed this. Still gonna work, but this is what you get. Everything's dry, and yeah. Go ahead and remove this cardboard. Take a look, see what we got. And it goes without saying, you want to make sure that when you do pour this, you're pouring on a level surface. Okay, I've got a little bit of stickage here, but nothing crazy. Everything comes out pretty clean and looks pretty good. There you go. This is Beatty. I've introduced her before. Tempting Fate. She's down. She's interested. That's enough. Okay, well. Grab some fat. And it's back to work. Okay, now I'm going to be pouring these bases with a 2-part urethane resin. This stuff's 50-50 by volume. And when you're pouring this little resin, it is very important to make sure your mix is accurate. Otherwise, it may not harden properly, and you may end up with some bases you can't use. I actually did not pour quite enough resin, or mix quite enough resin, but that's okay. That's one good thing about this stuff, is that so long as you don't get mold release on it, you can come back later and add a little extra resin. And it should adhere well. This stuff dries quickly, but not quite as quickly as it looks on screen. I've sped this footage up quite a bit, as I'm sure you've noticed by this point. I usually add a little brown pigment. I didn't want to do that because I was mixing so little resin. I didn't want to potentially mess up the ratio and cause something funky to happen. As you can see, I did not pour too much resin in here. I don't have a lot of extra flashing. You really do not want to over pour these. If you do, you're going to end up sanding, and resin dust isn't good for you. So if you have to, I would suggest sanding these outside with a respirator on. Maybe even wet sanding them. Okay, these are the bases that have been primed, and I'm just going over it with a little bit of gray craft paint. This paint job's not going to be too fancy. You can knock these out pretty quickly. You should be able to get them painted, I'd say 10 in 10 minutes. 15 at the most. I mean, you can take as much time as you want, but with this method that I'm doing, it's kind of a nasty little wet blend. There's nothing pretty about it. But it does not give a bad result. Just going with progressively lighter shades of gray here. I'm going to end up at a kind of a dirty white. A very, very light gray. You can dry brush these if you want. This is fairly close to dry brushing. It's just, again, an ugly wet blend. Works pretty well. And now that that's dried, I'm going to go over everything with a wash that I've made. Nothing too fancy about this wash. It's a little black ink, brown ink, matte medium, water, and some dish soap. Wiping away some of that excess so that it doesn't puddle too much. Dries a little quicker this way and looks a little more natural. Now, as said, you should be able to paint 10 of these in 10 minutes. That does not include drying time. Always a catch. Clean up. Okay, now I'm just going to go around and clean this rim of the base up here. Something I'm sure you've all done quite a few times, so I'm just going to show you on this one base. Kind of wish I'd used brown for this, but wherever. Black works. Nice clean look. Boom, that's done. Okay, now I'm gonna take some tacky glue, some grass tufts I've made, a couple of dots here and there at random. You don't want to go too nuts with this stuff. End up with a nice looking base that you don't have room to set a model on. That's no good. So yeah, kind of use it sparingly. You know the drill. And what's cool about grass tufts is if they are too big, you can cut them down. Make them a little smaller, get a little more variety. Okay, now I'm thinning out some tacky glue, and I've got a little painted sawdust here I'm going to use. Put down in a few places. Maybe it's moss, maybe it's grass. I don't know. It looks cool. That's the important thing. Who cares what it is, right? Vegetation. And don't go nuts with this either. I don't know how well a model would super glue down to dried sawdust. Probably okay, but again, I'm not sure. Why am I using tweezers here instead of my hands? Couldn't say. Feeling fancy, I guess? I don't know. Gets the job done, though. And that's pretty much it. Blow off that excess. Oh, that's fine. Glue's not dry yet. As soon as it's dry, it's not going to do that. I promise. And okay, there you go. That's it. Like, subscribe, leave a comment. Thanks for watching. Bye.